Well, good evening, Brennan. Welcome to the Lodge Hope of Karachi, number 337 in our lockdown lecture series. Brennan, I'm delighted to tell you this is meeting 35. I can't believe we've been doing this since March now, Brennan, and we're now in Remembrance Tide. As usual, can I ask you to sign the virtual tile on our Facebook pages so we do have a record of everyone who's visited us during this period of time. The Grand Lodge of Scotland guidelines remind us that we have to keep our video cameras on so we can see who you are, at least at the start of the meetings, Brian. But if your bandwidth does play up, please feel free to switch it off, and please have a recognisable name. So if we have questions or anything later, we can talk to you. This evening, Brian, I did advertise this as our remembrance meetings. So I'm going to start with Binion's lines and pause for a few minutes of respectful silence in memory of those that gave the ultimate sacrifice and for everyone else who served our country in conflict around the world. They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them.
We will remember them.
When you go home, tell them of us and say, for your tomorrow, we gave our today. Thank you, Brian. I just felt that was fitting, particularly because this evening's presentation is coming from a veteran himself, worshipful brother Alan Breward. I've met Alan now through the Internet Lodge, but it does seem that our paths had crossed, not during service, because I was in the Royal Air Force, the service that admits the good-looking ones and intellectuals, and Alan was in the Royal Navy. But Alan has been a volunteer at the National Memorial Arboretum for many years. And this evening, he is going to tell us the story of the National Memorial Arboretum. And Alan's been heavily involved in that for many, many years. But I think interestingly for us as a Masonic audience, talk to us a little bit about the Masonic connections that we see down there in Staffordshire. Alan, the floor is yours, sir.
Can I have the screen?
Yep.
Hi, good evening, brethren, and thank you very much for the invite here. As Gordon has said, we met through the Internet Lodge, but for many years, myself and my wife, I was introduced to the Armed Forces Memorial, or then the National Memorial Arboretum in Staffordshire. Now, this is the picture of the current Masonic Garden in Staffordshire. It is just one of currently 330 plus memorials at the Arboretum. About 60% of them are military orientated and 40% civilian memorials. But this memorial was only built and dedicated in 2017. Prior to it this is what it looked like, and this was probably 2010, 2012. I was a volunteer along with a wife there for many years. That time we started just doing the grounds. The Arboretum, as it is in Staffordshire, as I say, and I say this is just one of many of the memorials there. This was the entrance to it, a bit bleak. It's surrounded by yew trees. We lost the yew trees more than once because yew doesn't like water. The Arboretum is in what can only be described as a floodplain for both the River Trent and the River Tame. The River Tame used to be one of the dirtiest rivers in England, as it came from the Black Country through Birmingham into Tamworth and then up and joined the River Trent, actually at the corner of the Arboretum. And in 2002, this was the first sod cutting of the Masonic Garden. And the gentleman who was highly involved in it was a guy called Eddie Ford. And Eddie Ford was then a worshipful master within Staffordshire. But they got no support from anywhere else. A few lodges gave them money for the first sods to be cut. And at that time, to plant a tree at the Arboretum was around about £300 for charity. And this was when it was run completely by volunteers. You had to, in those days, pay to get in. The car park was free. But since then, they had museum status, which meant that it's now free entry, although they do ask you for a donation, and it's £4 to park your car all day. And inside the Masonic Garden, here's what you see. You can see on this left-hand side here, which is the one that's on the east side, is that where all the yew trees have sadly died off. So there was a problem with water and yew, and the water actually came up to about halfway here in the garden. The rough and the smooth ashlar, you have to look hard to see which is the different one. These stones came from China. When they first came into Staffordshire, I think a number of us scratched their heads and thought, have we got two smooth ashlars here? And then within it was the black and white checkered pavement. The black tiles had to be rejected because they weren't quite black enough. So that was another thing that was a problem. One of the other tributes to the memorials there is the women Freemasons, and on their centenary year in 2008, this tree was planted and a plaque was added. I have to say that that is outside of the Masonic Garden, only just outside. Now, the site itself is in the heart of the nation. It's within, as it says there, over 50,000 maturing trees. When I started going there way back in the early zeros, they were little trees. And I changed this the other night because it actually said over 100 memorials. I went up 2 weeks ago and I can confirm there are over 330 of them. And it's built for a lasting tribute for those who served their country and who died in conflict. Their mission statement was to be the UK's year-round centre of remembrance, a spiritualism uplifting place with honours to the fallen, recognising the sacrifice, service and sacrifice, and fostering pride to our country. It's a unique peace and place of haven of peace. You can contemplate the peace there with the wooded parkland, and it's in the heart of what is now known as the National Forest. The gentleman on the left is David Childs. David Childs was a former commander in the Royal Navy, and whilst he was in the Royal Navy, towards the end of his commission, he was working out of Washington and DC, and one day he went to visit Arlington, and he wondered why there was no memorials like this in England to our soldiers, sailors and airmen. and the people for remembrance. So he scratched his head and everything else, and eventually got together with a Wing Commander Leonard Cheshire, Royal Air Force VC, and they established the idea for a national focus of remembrance. They had no money. They had just a couple of ideas. They didn't have a tree or a patch of ground to think about where they were going to have this place for remembrance. They drew up plans. They had ideas, as I say. During the time with Leonard Cheshire, they had a concert in Germany. Sadly, this was before concerts never had the concept of insurance. It threw it down with rain and the concert was cancelled. What little money they had collected from people contributing actually went into the red at that time. David, as I say, was a member of the Royal Navy. He was in Washington working for NATO. So one day he had a time off for Sunday and he went and walked round Arlington Cemetery. And the next day, rumor has it, he caught the plane back, and being I think he was a lieutenant commander then, he'd got first class or front end status. And on the seat next to him was a newspaper, probably the Daily Telegraph. And in that paper, there was an advert for the National Forest. The people of Staffordshire, Leicestershire, Derbyshire, and Shropshire, I think it was, were looking for a place a large area of ground for a forest area. I dare say not as much as the Highlands is, but currently in the centre of England. And this is the area of what is the National Forest. Now, the Arboretum itself is down here on the bottom left-hand side in Alrawaz, and it's in between Lichfield and Burton-on-Trent, triangulated by Nottingham, Derby, Leicester, and Birmingham. The first plantings of trees there were in 1995. But in 1994, they'd got little or no money. So what they did, they went to the then Prime Minister and with an idea. And the idea was that they'd go or they wanted this place of remembrance. John Major at the time said he would match it, 40% match it with what the public could actually raise. But I say in 1993, 94, they had no money, no land, no trees, just ideas. But David had gone back, spoke to the people with the National Forest, and they suggested that he approached a company called Redland Aggregates. What they were doing at the time, they were going to fill this area of land in. It had been a quarry for stone. It was loose stone in the area of that. Eventually came waterfall and then became landfill. They'd roughly covered it, but with very, very poor soil. So the first thing it needed was soil topping. And I say in 1995, these first trees were planted. Now, I believe that this photograph here, sorry, it isn't my photograph, with the tree keepers, eventually and this was round about 2006, this photograph was taken, and it's at the corner of the Merchant Navy Wood. And each of these trees represented a merchant ship that was lost in WW2. And they were Sybil oak trees. They were planted as oak trees because of the days of old when wooden ships, the oak tree was the main contributor in that. But they couldn't have mighty oaks. So they went for a Sybil oak, which grows quite straight, as you see, to about 10 foot and then has an open canopy. The first real dedication of a tree was in 96, and it was in the Greek chapel here. You see here, it represents a chapel that you'd see in Crete or Greece, in the open air, where the soldiers would hold their ceremonies on a Sunday of church and chapel, get together during conflict, and this was the first real garden dedication and tree dedication. I wasn't there at the time, but the Lord Lieutenant of Staffordshire was there, and he dedicated the first tree with the aid of 2 Greek Orthodox priests. The problem was they came from Birmingham, and they couldn't quite understand the northern tang of that being Greek Orthodox priests. And so it was difficult when they came to give the service at that time. They needed an interpreter, but they got through. And the Lord Lieutenant regularly said to me, Alan, where was that first tree that I dedicated? Because in the end, he dedicated quite a number, but we had lots of support from the Lord Lieutenant. In 2000, the first lot of problems occurred with weather. You can see over here, deep water from the flooding from the River Trent, and they were currently building what is known as the Millennium Chapel. This Millennium Chapel is a multi-faith chapel. It's referenced as a Millennium Chapel as no other chapel was dedicated or built in 2000 in the UK. In fact, I only know of one other Millennium Chapel that was consecrated in the world, and that was in Malta. But in the distance here, in the middle distance, you can see what is reputed to be the first memorial that was built and dedicated at the Arboretum. It's a polar bear memorial to the 49th Yorkshire West Riding Division. It arrived on the 28th of March, 94. The reason I know that is because it was a day that Radio 5 was opened. And Radio 5's first lot of news at 8 o'clock mentioned the fact that if you're traveling up the M40 and you saw a large polar bear, not to be worried, it was on its way to the National Memorial Arboretum. It arrived here in a horrendous storm, but at that day they were dedicating another memorial, which was to the George Cross Islands of Malta. The articulated lorry parked up and it started to slip, so they quickly had to lift the polar bear, which was made by the Essex woodcarvers, off. It weathered after its time there to become white wood, which they wanted it to be, to look like a polar bear. The polar bear was taken by the 49th Yorkshire West Riding Division when they got rid of their rose, and their cap's badge became a polar bear. Pardon me. Because during the Second World War, they were encamped in Greenland and they dug snow holes, and it was believed that their colonel-in-chief said, "Welcome home, my polar bears." Pardon me, there's the polar bear that's a bit white. 2004, I started working as a volunteer here at weekends. I was still gainfully employed as an electronic engineer in a company called Lucas's. And this is my wife and myself, who at weekends, we were happily thinning, coppicing trees. We had no forestry education. We just knew that you had to walk up and down for these dedicated trees. And at times, you started to hate certain trees, from willow, field maple, to other trees, but I have to say that the willow tree was probably the worst one. But it was so healthy there because of the wet area. This is a group of the volunteers who were all up there twice a month on a Saturday and a Sunday, enjoying ourselves and say trimming the trees. At that time, we'd trim the tree and we'd burn the stubble. Now it is all mulched down. I think in the far distance, pardon me, here you can see the heap of trees we're building up in that. But in 2006, 2007, the Arboretum was approached for the building of the Armed Forces Memorial. The Armed Forces Memorial was bid for its place, and the National Memorial Arboretum won it. They didn't want it in London, too far south, and it was chosen for the middle of the country in Staffordshire. So this was in build, a 30-meter high mound with a couple of 3 meters high wall in 2007. It was eventually finished. In October 2007, the Armed Forces Memorial was opened and dedicated by the Archbishop of Canterbury, and the Queen opened it. On the 11th, I'm here, we're having a briefing of what's going to happen the following day with our boss, who was he was Commander Charlie Baggett Hewitt, and the volunteers. And behind him is one of the statuettes within the Armed Forces Memorial. There are, at that time, 16,000 names on these walls because there was no memorial to a soldier, sailor, airman who had lost his life in conflict, and woman who had lost his life in conflict since WW2. And it starts at this point here on the inner side in the Palestine era. These were blank at that time. They've now got Gulf War and fallen heroes for the Afghan and Iraq wars on that. I can actually say that 1971, when I was in the Navy, is here, and the Falklands conflict is remembered here. You will see here, please keep a note of the figures that are on there. The 4 figures. The casualty who is being lifted off the field of battle. The Gakari character, indicating our Commonwealth soldiers. A female character, because we had females on the front line. And this soldier here is representing Ulysses, who's pointing to the way off of the underworld. The other characters I'll come to later. And this was on the morning of the 12th when we were preparing for the royal visit, and we were all being briefed. So on the 12th, the Queen was here with the Archbishop of Canterbury, the Duke of Edinburgh, Prince Charles, and as then it was Lady Camilla, and the dedication and the opening. Now you remember there were only these 4 characters that day. On the 11th, on the 12th, suddenly the one carving his names on the wall appeared standing on the ammo box. It was that close a call on there. And in the afternoon, we had the fly past of the red arrows. Now going back to the Masonic Garden. The Masonic Garden itself was a further idea after 2002 that we needed to make it a better idea. So a submission of drawings was given to the Arboretum, and this was the architect's favourite. and it's got a Cartesian arch, which is, I understand, as closely represented as a Grand Master's or a Provincial Grand Master's collar, and the square and compass is here in red brick with the two pillars on the outside. This was rejected by the Arboretum trustees because A, they didn't want the arch, B, they didn't want it in brick, which upset the architect. He went away and redid it, so eventually we did change it. They also didn't like the two pillars in, sorry, I don't know why that happened, two pillars outside of the temple. A representation was sent to the trustees and pointed out that in the volume of the sacred law, the two pillars are outside the temple, and they went back and said, okay, we'll let you have that, but you're still not having it in red brick. It has to be in standard normal stone, which it is currently in a Cotswold limestone. Now, this was on the 18th of April 2017 when the rededication of the memorial took place. The stewards from Staffordshire were given the title of the guards. We were prepared with people with umbrellas, but it was a very warm day. The guy who was the official photographer was this guy here, Taff Harris. He was a member of, or he still is a member of, St. John's of Lichfield Lodge, which meets in Tamworth. There are no Masonic lodges meeting in the city of Lichfield, even though there are some very famous English Masons who were born, who lived in Lichfield. In fact, I understand the first Freemason or named Freemason lived in Lichfield. This gentleman here was my worshipful master when I was his junior warden. It's Granville Angel. Some of you may have seen his book for sale. It is the Freemasons' Victoria Crosses during World War I. Now, on the celebration or the dedication, this gentleman was the man who was instrumental in the building and also one of the builders of this wonderful temple. He, his name is Eddie Ford. He had another friend who sadly just 2 weeks ago passed to the Grand Lodge above, and that was worshipful brother Wilf Burt of Kibblestone Lodge in Derbyshire. But he was an operative Mason as well. And on one of them, just behind here, you will see a square and compasses on another picture. And he actually carved in stone or out of stone the square and compasses. I say, sadly, he passed to the Grand Lodge above just a couple of weeks ago. So we had all and sundry there for the opening. Bear in mind that in 2002, London didn't want to know anything about us. I hope I've got nobody and I don't upset anybody saying that it was north of Watford. But we did have them for the dedication in 2017. Remember that it was big news 2018 with the 100th anniversary of the end of WW1. And everyone was were having commemorative, not celebrations, but dedicated services for that. These two gentlemen, I'm sorry I don't know, or brothers, were there to lay wreaths on behalf of their respective lodges. This picture was the one that appeared in the square or the Freemasonry Today. I say the official photographer's somewhere way back there. I just happened to be in the right place at the right time to snap it. Now, other lodges have met there. This is the Internet Lodge. And in 2019, I had my meeting in Tamworth on the Saturday. And we'd gained permission to actually lay wreaths and have a small service of remembrance from both the Staffordshire province and also the Internet province in East Lancashire. And we're holding the chapel service. This is inside the Millennium Chapel, and it's held up by 12 Douglas firs. On the Douglas firs are the 12 apostles in cartoon characters. So you've got the tax collector, you've got the fisherman, and others that were carved again by the Essex wood carvers. And there's also a wonderful carving here of the speaker. And this was also done by them. And it is Jesus talking to the children around him at the bottom of the stairs. So it was a bit of a wet day, but I'm here as the master laying a wreath on behalf of the Internet Lodge. Other memorial services that go on is these photographs were taken from the National Service Day. And the National Service Association held a regular parade. I was the standard bearer for the Fleet Air Arm Association and the Birmingham branch. I became the lead standard bearer, or the standard bearer in charge for a long, long time of this service. And in 2014, I said, could we not invite the Masons to our service? Bearing in mind that a guy called Gerald Rhodes, who was one of the main instigators of this service, was a Freemason in Warwickshire. So we invited the PGMs of Warwickshire, Derbyshire, Worcestershire, and Staffordshire. And the following year, we said, can't we have your standards? And they said, well, they never parade. He said, we probably never go out except for Provincial Grand Lodge and sometimes for the church service. But in 2014, we actually got 3 provinces with us and eventually got them to amble because of the march past. And they made a very good and they were very well received by everyone, including the cadet service here. And I say they did actually march with their umbrellas at times. I'm the allegedly lead standard. How many times does a lead standard lead from the back? But I had 2 national standards to help me on the way. So what I'm going to do now is go for a brief visual tour around some other memorials at the Arboretum. And I'll start off with the Scottish divisions. The Army Division, or the Army Parade Ground, is here in front of the Armed Forces Memorial. Before the Armed Forces Memorial was there, the Yin and the Yang were there, and it's in this parade ground. Now, these were the first ones that are right at the front of the Army Parade. I don't know whether they're the senior division or regiments of the army up in Scotland, but I do know that there are a number of them. These trees were purchased and dedicated to the men who served in the various regiments. I think at that time, I do know they're about £300, but it started off with Lichfield, and they went to the undertakers and approached them and said, look, if anyone wants to dedicate a life to anywhere for a living thing, how would you like a tree in the Arboretum? And it soon filled up in this area just around the Armed Forces Memorial. So, but then they approached the military, and a lot of the, say, regiments, ships, flights were all up front for their names to be dedicated on these trees. Getting around the Arboretum, it's 150 acres. You can go for the ride in the buggy. When I was there, it used to be £25 for the day. You got your own guide. Richard was a member of the light infantry, and he worked with me on a Monday when we were working as both guides and also outreach. But there's also a land train here. When I was the driver for the land train, you had to listen to my incessant talk as we went round the Arboretum. Now we've got a professional who's doing it on a CD. The other second train at the Arboretum is a memorial to the railways. But you can also get these new toys, the GPS ones, that when you approach a memorial, you click and it will tell you the whole history. There is also a guidebook, and which is about £7, I think now, but that gives you all of the memorials up to its last reprint. I'm going back to the chapel here. If you remember when the chapel altar was with the internet lodge, it was covered. This was during Lent, because during Lent, I understand that the Church of England uncover their altars to make it a plain altar. But I don't know whether you can make out the words, but it says, "In prison, you visited me." This altar was made by the then Borstal boys at Sinfin, now called a Young Offenders Attention Centre. But they made it, and one Monday I was there, it wasn't during Lent, and there was a family in the chapel, and there was a boy or teenager with his mother and father, I found out, who were lifting the altar cover, and he was showing his mother what he had helped do whilst his time in the Young Offenders Group, or Young Offenders School, Young Offenders Prison. Now, behind the altar, you see the two crosses of Calvary. On one, or on both of them, there are 4 sets of handcuffs, which were given to us by the West Midland Police. On the one over here on the left, you'll see the handcuffs are open, because they believe that one of the robbers repented and asked for forgiveness. The other one, they didn't know. So one is still closed. But we did have a story to tell on the open ones. Because the chapel's not held by a guide 24/7, or by the time that it's open between 10 and 5, a little boy came in, put his hand in the middle of these cuffs and started to close them off, to the point that he's hanging up going, "Dad, Dad, I can't get down." And we didn't have a key. We had to call the fire brigade to get him out. Since then, we do have keys for them. But these were the things we had. They were Dutch elm trees. Now, I know we're all old enough to remember the Dutch elm disease, but they were actually 2 trees from David Child's garden that were chopped down during the Dutch elm disease, and they utilised them as the 2 crosses. The rest of them, there were the gifts with the knives, the 12, which is 12 knives. There is around the knives, a silvered barbed wire showing that we still have slavery and prisons, and there are 2 plates as well with it. So that is in the Millennium Chapel. And in the Millennium Chapel at 11 o'clock every day, there is the service of remembrance. It's the only place in England that has the daily service of remembrance at 11. In Melbourne in Australia, they have their service of remembrance, but I say that's in Australia at 11 o'clock every day. Now, the other memorials, this is, I believe, the most decorated soldier in World War I. He never carried a rifle. He was a member of the North Staffordshire Regiment. He was a stretcher bearer. His memorial or his tree is in the Staffordshire memorial area. This memorial is to the donors, the kidney donors and things like this, so it was dedicated there. The Christmas Peace Memorial was unveiled by Prince William. You can just see the cuff here. This cuff is from the Warwickshire Regiment, because it's believed that the Christmas truce and the soccer match was between the Warwickshire Regiment, and on the other side there is the Axis Regiment. I can't tell you what that is, but I believe it's a German regiment from there. But this is one of the first memorials you see made out of leaves, where the sculpture, and I say it's just in front of the Masonic garden, and you can just make out the square and compasses there from that gentleman, say Wilf, who sadly passed away. The Army Padres have their memorial with swords turned in to plowshields here, and with the crook. And this is the River Tame, which now has otters in it, we believe. Now, this is the back of the engineer, the Royal Navy Engineers Memorial, the Stokers Memorial, and also to do with the electrical side. On the back, it says Tubal Cain, the first artificer in metals. I believe he is the patron of the stokers, etc. And there is a memorial there to the Fleet Air Arm. It's an aircraft carrier. This memorial is to the Royal Engineers. These 4 granite stones weighing over 5 tons were presented to the Royal Engineers by the Falklands community for the help during the Falklands conflict. And in the winter, with the mist, they appear to float. When we were asked the Royal Engineers why they have these 4 stainless steel pillars holding up, their answer was, because we can. No other explanation, because we can. Next to that, and by the is the beat. This is a memorial to the police forces of the UK, and the trees down the beat were conker trees or horse chestnuts, because the policeman's truncheon, or the original one, was made from the horse chestnut tree. At the very bottom is the memorial, it's only partly built here, to the Polish who served and helped during World War II. And this is the lamppost that was outside Hitchin police station, and is dedicated to first woman police officer who lost her life in duty, in the line of duty. There is a new police memorial that's going up, and this is at the end of the Irish Grove, and it's going to be huge. So this was taken a couple of weeks ago during the build. So that is 340th plus one. But others, the Leicestershire Regiment with their silver tiger. Gibraltar is remembered here. This is a piece of rock from Gibraltar that weighs over 3 tons. I understand the Royal Air Force were bringing this memorial back, and all the weight in that aircraft was 3 tons. I think it should have been, I don't know how much the story's true, but they had to knock a piece off to get it down to enable it to be flown back to the UK. So I take it with a pinch of salt now. The George Cross Islands of Malta and Gozo are remembered down in the bottom left, and the Cyprus conflict in the 50s is remembered here. And these are all in the Mediterranean area of the Arboretum. The Royal Army Medical Corps is remembered just beyond the Polish Memorial, and there are 38 trees dedicated to the VCs that were earned or given to the members of the Army Medical Corps. It is the corps in the Army that holds the most VCs, and you'll see here there's a VC on bar and a VC on bar for the 2 surgeons performed. Their trees are also like a red maple, which is the same colour as the Victoria Cross ribbon. When the Victoria Cross first started, there was a blue one, which was Masonic blue, which was given to the Royal Navy. In 1918, when along came the Royal Air Force, they all reverted to this red coloured for the Victoria Cross. The stories behind this is that this memorial was to the soldiers and the battalions of the Hampshire and Isle of Wight divisions, and that I was there for the day of this dedication, and David Childs was there, but he's a padre, and he did the dedication of the service. But he asked me if I'd take the colonel and the colonel's lady round and show them the rest of the Arboretum in the little buggy. I will now tell you a secret that the colonel's wife, who was at the back of the buggy, and I really shouldn't have been overhearing it, said, "You know that tiger? It looked nothing like a fecking tiger." Which I had to, it goes without saying, you're not really supposed to say things, Mom, like that. But it just brought them, they were down to earth. The Royal Army physical personnel with these are things from the children who went up there, and it was for the Battle of the Somme. The other memorials to the Army, and I'm sure we all know about the Yangtze incident with Concord, Amethyst, London, and the Black Swan, their memorial there. But one of the saddest memorial is the shot at dawn. 303 stakes representing the soldiers who were executed during the First World War. 301 of them are all other ranks. 2 of them are officers. 302 of them are in alphabetical order. The 303rd is not in alphabetical order, and it took ages for me to find out why. That 303rd is a guy called Short. He was short by name, short by nature. But he actually joined the services before World War I, and he was a deserter before World War I. He was given 56 days detention before World War I. He changed his name 2 or 3 times, and he was actually executed for being what I can only feel is Percy Topless and the monocled mutineer. the story of the guy who was one of the British soldiers during the Australians' mutiny in World War One. The 303 are here, I say, represent the soldiers that were executed. They were all pardoned in 2006. There are names on there with age unknown. What you have to bear in mind is they all signed or put their cross to say they were over 16 to join the British Army, or in one case, the Royal Navy. It is the most easterly part of the Memorial Gardens, because this is the first place the sun breaks during the dawn. So it was thought that this was a poignant place to put the Shot at Dawn Memorial. I have to say that the first time that I was there, I had to sit and be consoled for 20 minutes. I wept. It is heart-wrenching to have those in front of you. So they all had what was called a court-martial, where they stood or sat in front of the brigadiers, etc., and their signature was signed by Haig for their execution. At the other end is the stillborn and the stillborn and neonatal deaths memorial, where this little baby represents a child as a fetus in there. So that these are the two extremes that I look at in that. Oh, pardon me, just a minute. So in the Shot at Dawn, the soldier has his hands tied behind his back, but this stake is a guy called Sub-Lieutenant Edwin Dwyer, the Royal Naval Division. He is one of two commissioned officers who were executed. He was executed and tried by the Army court. He should have really been tried by a naval military court, not an army military court. He was actually challenged by another sub-lieutenant who we joined up with, who we couldn't get on with. And there's a book called that his family wrote, For God's Sake, Shoot Straight. And that again is quite revealing of what all these soldiers had to go through for their court-martial, etc. I've read the two books, Shot at Dawn and Blindfolded and Alone. They are heart-wrenching. One thing is there are no Australians who were executed during World War I. But I say the 303 ranged from English, Irish, Welsh, Scottish, New Zealanders, and Chinese, because they had the coolies as well, and Indian. Other memorials, I put this on for Gordon. It is the Royal Air Force Association. Now, when this arrived, they put the roundel down, and the tiles came. I can honestly tell you now that the red tiles have been replaced and a number of the white tiles have been replaced. The blue ones have been well and good, and we couldn't understand why. When I did a little bit of research, spoke to Loughborough, apparently these are Italian tiles. The red and the white tiles were made in the valley in Italy. The blue tiles were made on the coast, and so they were different temperature extremes within the ovens. The bird here represents the bird on the Royal Air Force Association's badge, and he's an eagle. I'm not going to say what the face looks like, but it doesn't look anything like an eagle to me. And he was called Winston. And I wondered why he was called Winston. I phoned up Loughborough, the headquarters, the Royal Air Force Association, and said, why is your bird called Winston? they hadn't got a clue. So we dig deeper and deeper. Apparently it was what the blacksmith used to say when he was building him. They say there's over 2,000 feathers on that bird when they made it with the smithy in Norfolk. But guarding it is the Royal Air Force Police here and the Armed Forces Memorial. These are all trees to the Royal Air Force. Other memorials is a Sikh memorial. Ubliki is the Royal Artillery. And I found out what it is. It's me pressing the control. It's the Welsh regiments with Welsh stone and the Not Forgotten Association. This association survives from the end of World War II and holds a number of garden parties put on by the Queen and others in Buckingham Palace 2 to 3 times a year. Now these are the newer ones with the Gulf War Memorial, Bastion and the Basra. This Bastion one is dedicated to the soldiers, I say, who lost their lives in Bastion. And the Basra Wall, the soldiers of the united, the countries that served in Camp Bastion were there, and the Basra. And they'd start off, the first number here are Royal Marines and the Fleet Air Arm, because it was in the Ark Royal's helicopter that crashed first during those days. The plaques were all original plaques from the wall in Basra. The families wanted the wall re-erected in Staffordshire from Basra. It's a sandstone desert in Basra. They wouldn't have lasted 6 months, that wall in Staffordshire, with its weathered. But the actual wall is built within these marble covers and plaques, and all of the brass plaques were there. The memorial one here is to the Falklands campaign. There are no names on that memorial, except for 3 civilians whose names are on the back of that wall, back of that large rock there. The reason why there are no names there, the Arboretum said it's close enough to the Armed Forces Memorial that that's where they're remembered. The Irish conflict. Here is the Irish ash grove. Each of these trees is dedicated to a soldier and a prison officer who lost their lives during the conflict there. This is the Ulster Grove and the 6 counties of Ulster. Somebody will say, yes, there are 8, but these are the 6 counties of Ulster. And the George Cross Ulster Parade is there as well. And those trees there are dedicated to the police officers and the police stations during the conflict from Antrim to Stranraer. The wrens are remembered. There are no wrens in the Royal Navy now. When I was in, it was the Women's Royal Naval Service. Now they are called female ratings. But their memorial service was held, and they had a dedicated wren rose dedicated during that year. This was Charlie Dimmock. She had harnessed a wren rose. And this is the Aquila Memorial wren rose, or the wren, which is dedicated to the sinking of the Aquila, where there were a number of wrens who lost their lives on that hospital ship in World War II. Again, that was made by the Essex woodcarvers. Every year, new names are cut into the memorial until, say, 2007, when the memorial was dedicated. They were all done by laser trimming over in Ireland. It's Portland stone. The Portland stone was cut, shipped to Ireland, and then laid on a flatbed, and the names were cut in. Some mistakes were made. But since then, they've all been cut by hand, and this is a stonemason cut in the 2009, as it says there, names. And there was always a naming ceremony for the families of the soldiers, sailors, airmen, and women who sadly lost their lives during that year. This year, there was only 3 names that went on. Now, I say, when I first went up there, I didn't believe I knew anybody who'd lost their lives when I was in the Navy. But these, on the top 2, you'll see there's an Eaton Jones, RH, and an Eaton Jones, JE. EJ on the right was a Sea Vixen pilot on 899 Squadron when I was there. He was also a pilot with Curtis, who lost his life in the Falklands conflict when they dropped off the radar. His uncle is the one on the left. He lost his life at Yeovilton, again in a twin boomer, but I think it was in 1953. So I think it was wasn't a Vixen. But my boss, when I was working for the army at Fort George, that fought between Nairn and Inverness, where the Joint Service Mountaineering Training Centre, as I was when I was working there as an instructor, was a Major Jerry Owens. And him and Somerton lost their lives in India whilst climbing a high peak for the Army Expeditionary Force. And a guy called Harrison was from my squadron 899. He was a pilot of a Sea Vixen who died on the 13th of November 1972. I know that date because that's my wife's 21st birthday. She'll now kill me for telling you her age. But I'd actually serviced his aircraft as an electrician the night before. I was on the Court of Inquiry. He'd actually clipped a Buccaneer wing brake as he was put onto the side cat or the waist cat. He dipped as they normally did on the waist cat. The observer banged out and survived, but sadly Harrison went under the ship in the Moray Firth. I didn't think I'd know anybody on that wall. Since then, I've known lots of others as well. Kendall, he was a Phantom pilot. Other memorials, the Burma Railway. These railway sleepers and lines were brought back from Burma and the Death Railway by HMS Northumberland and laid here. We weren't allowed to touch them because they'd got some horrible paint or stuff on them at the time, and you had to handle them with very, very much PPE. And behind it is Rotary Ridge. Now those trees are about this high. In the same area is the Children of the Far East Prisoners of War. This is their museum, which is in the shape of an Indonesian central village chapel, meeting room, and it was put together and paid for by the Children of the Far East Prisoners of War. I'm actually standing in the lynch gate that was between Changi Jail and the burial ground in Singapore in Changi. So each soldier that was died in Changi passed through this actual gateway I'm standing in. It's a museum. Some people can't go in there. I know my wife doesn't like going in there because it affects her so much, because it does bring it home of what it was like during World War II as a prisoner of war. But in there, there's a window. And this window was the real window that was in the chapel that's on the Burma Railway. It's a replica, but it did have this caricature within the Burma Railway window. on the Burma Railway. The Japanese never picked it up at all. And so even though they were working hard on the railway and fighting for their lives, they still had humor to put this up there. The other one is say within the thing. I said I'd come back to the Armed Forces Memorial. This memorial shows a statuette of 1 1/3 real size. They're 1 1/3 because if they were real size, they'd be lost. So they've got to be that a little bit bigger. At the back of the memorial is a couple, an elderly couple with a man and a woman who have seen it all before and wonder when it's going to end. The character on top of the stretcher, or the casualty, has actually died in battle. I know, he's naked. You come into the world naked, you go out of the world naked. He is on the stretcher representing a shield, because as in olden days in the battle, you would be the hero would be carried off the battle by his shield. The character at the back is the Royal Navy. He's one of the easy ones because he's in square rig. The character next to him is the Royal Marine, and then the Royal Air Force. Excuse me. Why is he in the Royal Air Force? I know that because he's got his mapping compass, so he can get his map out when he's sitting flying the aeroplane. And the front one is a army soldier. And the widow is represented here with her child, who are grieving for the hero. On the other side, I think it is anyway, the next one, yeah. On the other side is the one representing Ulysses pointing the way off of the, out of the underworld. And the various crosses are put down there. I guess this was in late November time, probably mid-morning. Because at 11 o'clock on the 11th of November, the sun shines through two breaks within, one in the inner curved surface, one in the inner straight surface and one in the outer curved surface. And they line up to shine across the central wreath that's in the middle of the Armed Forces Memorial. This was taken on the 12th because on the 11th there is everyone from royalty and downwards or upwards representing a ticket-only memorial service there. And what's it mean to visitors? It's there. Reflection, hope, comradeship, selfishness, selflessness, service, celebration, love, beauty, activity, and enjoyment. When we first started there, Staffordshire Education Department wouldn't let their children in because they thought we were warmongers. Since then, we are now part of the national curriculum for the children to come and visit, to see that we represent conflict, resolution, and reconciliation. A day to avoid, though. The first weekend in October is the ride to the wall. There were upwards last year of 6,000 motorcyclists and their bikes and trikes for their memorial service, which is the first weekend in October. These are the largest charity givers to the Arboretum at any one time. I say in every October they're there, and they come. When they first came, they just used to meet at the Arboretum. Now it's a military precision that they come from Drayton Manor, they come from Leicestershire, Nottinghamshire, Derbyshire, and they all merge at about 10 o'clock at the Arboretum. So there are others. This one here is to the gliders of the D-Day landings. The Men of Ulster in the 36th Division, and the Polish one, the Duke of Kent unveiled that. I've left this one in because I regularly go over to Ireland. But there are other memorials to the different Masonic areas. This was my mother lodge, Nautical Services, and this tree is planted to a Mark Lodge. I have got in contact with the worshipful master of that Mark Lodge this year. I did it about 10 years ago, and they'd forgotten they'd planted a tree there, and he's trying to get up there at the moment, but it's COVID restricted, and you have to book 2 days in advance. And then a recent one is the Orange Lodges for the LOIs of over there, but this is a Scotland National Memorial tucked away in a corner. But this is probably the latest memorial to the nurses around the world. Last month, they celebrated the birthday of Nurse Cavell. Nurse Cavell was executed by the Germans, by the Axis in World War I, and a statue was put up to her in Paris. In World War II, the Germans ripped it down. But this, I say, is a very new memorial, represented the worldwide coverage of nurses around the world. And as I say goodnight, this is the view looking in the evening between the 2 pillars as the evening sun sets, looking towards Lichfield. So thank you very much, brethren. I am open for questions.
Alan, on behalf of the members of Lodge Hope of Karachi and all our guests here this evening, can I thank you for what I think has to have been the most powerful lecture that we've received in this lockdown lecture series, and it's so fitting that we've received it during Remembrance Tide. As you know, Alan, I've been there, Brennan, and I think many of the Brennan know what I do for a living as well. And every time I do go to the NMA, the National Memorial Arboretum, like Alan, it hits you. And particularly, Brennan, when you go to the Shot at Dawn Memorial. And again, like Alan, the first time I saw it, it takes everything away from you. It really does. So I would encourage you all, if at all possible, to visit at some point. Alan, thank you. That is very much appreciated. We do have questions, however, some very interesting questions, because it's such an important subject. And if I can just scroll past the good evenings from everyone. We do have Bren from all around the world here this evening, Alan, as well. So that's very heartfelt as well. So the first question, I know it's there, is there a memorial to the Merchant Navy?
Yeah. One of the early photographs I showed was of the first plantings in 1995. And that was the beginning of the Merchant Navy Wood. And in that Merchant Navy Wood, I think there is a tree planted to every merchant ship that was lost during World War II. The Lusitania is in there as well, along with Sir Percival from the Falklands conflict. Sir Percival's anchor is in the middle of that coppice. So the Lusitania's one is in there as well from them. But I say there is a tree planted to every ship lost during WW2, Merchant, the Red Duster and the Blue Duster. Yeah. They're Sybil oak trees. So
Thank you, Alan. There's another question for you, but I think you did go on to answer it later on because it was put on quite early. Much seems to be of a very English focus. So my question is, are there any gardens to remember the losses of servicemen and women from Scotland, Wales and Ireland? And I think you did do that later on in the presentation.
Yeah, in the Army Parade Ground, there's the Army, there's the Scottish regiments, there's also one to Royal Air Force Lossiemouth. When I was there, it was called Royal Naval Air Station Lossiemouth, but there is probably a tree to every Royal Air Force station, both this side and that side, along with the Northern Irish ones as well, the ships. There is an area within the dining facilities now, which is called Heroes Square. And there are a lot of large plaques there to different regiments and ships and squadrons.
Thank you, Alan. There's a comment to Ewan Campbell, because I think at one point in the presentation you talked about the oldest Scottish regiment, and Ewan rightly says that the senior regiment of foot and oldest within the British Army is the 1st Battalion, the Royal Scots, the Royal Regiment, formed in 1633, yep. And they're now part of the Royal Regiment of Scotland. But all of us really do know that they're a lot older than 1633. They're Pontius Pilate's bodyguards, so they probably go back about 2,000 years, and some of them will actually look they're that old. And I can say that, Brennan, because I work with a few of them.
I thought you was going to say there was a few members still here.
Well, there might be, but are there any memorials to the Bevan boys on site?
Yep, the Devonshire Regiment is remembered. It's actually just by the Shot at Dawn Memorial, but it's within, it's right next to the fairground. The showmen, I mean, when the showmen were there, I have to say that in the early days, we did lose one or two benches. These benches currently cost £1,000. We didn't know where these benches were going. We found out that some were actually being lifted by the River Tame and ended up in Burton, but others seemed to just vanish. We put it down to pikeys. But since the Showman's Guild have had their memorial, I think I can say with my heart on hand, we have not lost a bench. I'm not saying it was the pikeys, but I also have to say that the day we dedicated the Showman's Guild, which is a single needle and a fairground horse, there was more bling there than there was, I say, when the Queen dedicated the Armed Forces Memorial. We had something like 12 Lord Mayors and all their chains. The showman and everyone else and his dog was there. And I was driving the land train then, and I ended up having to drive it over rough ground to get some of the elderly showmen down. They paid for it well and truly, though.
Yeah. A comment from a brother who's just had to leave. I never realised how many memorials there were. Most shocking is the Shot at Dawn one, and I'm sure many of us can appreciate that. That was fantastic, very moving, very enjoyable. A question from Ian Walsh. Mention was made of Leonard Cheshire. I assume that is the same Leonard Cheshire who's associated with the Dam Busters and Cheshire Homes.
Yeah, he's Leonard Cheshire, BC. His wife was Sue Ryder, I believe, of the Ryder charities. I think was that to do with breast cancer? I believe it was. Leonard was highly involved with David right at the beginning. Sadly, he didn't survive the opening. He passed away just before. I know if it was on the day or just weeks before what was classified as the regular opening of the Arboretum, because Sue Ryder, although he was ill, was going to attend, but she had sent a message saying she couldn't. And we have the Leonard Cheshire Amphitheatre, which is just outside the chapel, which is a large open area where whilst they were renovating, shall I say, and laying the stones at the Armed Forces Memorial, they use that for lots of services.
We have with us the almoner for the Widow Sons Scotland, Alan, and he's commenting there that it is an annual pilgrimage for the Widow Sons Scotland to go down, and I know very many of them who do that and are moved by what they see. Someone who's been a regular visitor with us over the last few years and is a well-known presenter in his own right in America states, Alan, this is one of, if not the best presentation I think I have ever seen. Please pass this on to Alan. So I think rightly deserving plaudits. Excellent lecture, moving thought-provoking.
I can honestly say I forgot my notes.
Alec Crabe, one of our past masters up in Inverness. The War Memorial in Inverness is in Cavell Gardens, named after Nurse Edith Cavell. Thanks for a very moving presentation, a very powerful message. And it goes on, I think. Stuart Taylor, I have visited the Arboretum twice, and it is a wonderful area to give thanks and remember. The most poignant thing for me was seeing the name of the first patient whom I nursed in Northern Ireland in 1971. Who passed away in October of that year. He was shot on the last day of his 4-month tour. And I think there's so many stories like that for all those that
soldiers from the soldiers from the Northern Ireland conflict obviously have their name on the wall, and they have their own dedicated tree, say in the Ulster Grove. It's an ash grove. Sadly, we're getting ash dieback now, and we're having to replace a lot of those trees.
Danny Morrison from up Thurso Way, is there a memorial ground for agents of the SOE or of the resistant movements that supported the Allies?
There is a number of memorials in what is the special services area, so it could well be. Hopski's Private Army's got a memorial in that area. The Cockleshell Heroes have got one in that area. Annette has got one in that area. The Goose Green and things like that are all in that special services area. That's actually looked after by an ex-SAS member.
Alan, thank you so much for such a moving, poignant presentation this evening. I'm sure the Bren will leave this evening and sit back and at 9 o'clock raise a wee toast to those that served. Thank you so much, and for identifying some of the symbolism relating to the craft this evening. Alan, thank you. Bren, just before I do the intimations, I'm going to be rather shameless as a fundraiser for a military organisation and share with you this Masonic apron that has been lovingly created and crafted by Brother Kevin Taggart. It is being raffled for Poppy Scotland through Fife Masonic News. It's £5 a ticket, Brian. So please get in with the raffle. All money does go to Poppy Scotland. And yes, that's shameless of me, Brian, but it's not very often I've got a captive audience as I do this evening. And I will only do that during Remembrance Tide. Brian, next week we have got Brother Oscar Allen, another member of the Internet Lodge. He's an American chap, and he is going to come and talk to us about Prince Hall Freemasonry. And I think that's one of the areas of Freemasonry that I've been asked to try and find a speaker on. So he will be with us next week. So I hope that you can all join us again. Brian, just before I open the mics up so you can say your thank yous and good nights to Alan, I would just ask us all to have in your thoughts and prayers Brother Bob Donkin, a member of the Lodge Hope of Karachi, whose son's name is on the wall, lest we forget. Brian, please feel free to open your mics and say your good nights and your thank yous.
Good night, Alan. Thanks very much. Thank you.
Good night, Alan.
Very
very
moving
much.
and
Thank you, Alan.
Thank
you very much.
Cheers, Alan.
Bye.
Cheers,
Gordon.
Alan.
Well
Presentation.
done.
Alan, very interesting.
Cheers, Alan.
Thank
Very
you,
much.
Alan.
Alan.
Next week, Gordon.
Must be repeated. Cheers, Alan. Thank you, Gordon.
Thank you for the
Alan.
invite, Brethren.
Very
Thanks,
much.
Alan. Excellent presentation. Very thoughtful and moving. Thank you.
Okay.
very
Thank you.
moving, Alan. Very moving indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brother Alan. Most enjoyable.
Thank you, Alan.
Again, Brother Alan.
Excellent.
Very
Deep
enlightening.
down into yourself here.
Thank you, Alan.
Well done, Alan. Thank you.
Bye-bye now.
Well done again. Well done
Thanks,
again
Alan.
to
Thank you
Gordon
very
for
much.
setting it all up.
Thanks, Alan.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you very much for that. It was excellent.
Okay, Brian, I'm going to give you 5, 4,
Thank you and good night.
Thank you, Brother Alan. That's a
Good
wonderful.
night.
Well done again,
presentation.
Gordon.
Three.
Well done.
Thank you, brethren. Thank you very
Two.
much.
Nice to
for
be
the
with you
invite.
all. Take
One.
care.